Story 1. There's a very fun road that gets you from Niederdorf to Wack or back in Germany. You can go 60 or 70 kilometers per hour along smooth tight turns and little rolling hills. All around it for acres and acres or whatever's in season and no intersections for several kilometers. It's a very fun road to go too fast on. This day, something like wheat was in and it was high. I couldn't see around the corners, but I knew the road well and was staying in my lane, and I was going fast and smiling. About halfway in, I heard a voice in my head as clear as if the speaker were sitting next to me, and it said, "You need to slow down." It was startling, and I braked immediately. 2 seconds later, I come through one of the turns and into the end of a combine, taking up both lanes and moving slowly. I barely stopped in time. Those extra 2 seconds of brake time saved Volvo at least, but I'm pretty sure they saved my life too. Story 2. I was with a coworker. He had lied to me about going to a family party of his, but when I showed up, it was just him and we went to a bar. I rolled my eyes and just thought I could clench my teeth through it. He knew the owner of the bar and got me alcoholic drinks. I was only 20. I started pouring out the drinks when the dude was shooting pool because I didn't want to be tipsy or drunk while dealing with him. That decision honestly saved me. I told him I wanted to go home, but he talked me into taking him home first. So I followed the directions he gave me and I pulled into a hookah bar parking lot instead. He started getting really aggressive and trying to kiss me. I kept pushing him off. I was still trying to be polite but firm and telling him to stop. That's when I noticed a group of guys around my car, talking to my coworker in my car in another language. Then opened my car door, got out, and proceeded to grab me by the hair to try to pull me out of my car. The other guys gathering around. I had the mind to lock my door when I noticed the other guys. I also put my car in reverse. So when he grabbed my hair, I let off the brake and my car started rolling back, so he let go of me. It was terrifying. I told our boss the next day and he quit when our boss asked him about it. Edit. I even drove away with my passenger door wide open. I didn't stop to close it until I was several miles away, and even then I was super paranoid. Story 3. So it technically didn't save me. It would have. Anyway, a couple of months after my 10th birthday, we went on a family vacation to visit my dad's side of the family. They lived a state away. My mom was about 6 months pregnant with my only baby brother at the time. We got to our hotel at about 2, and by 3 we decided we wanted to make the most of the day and go to the aquarium. I got fully dressed and ready to go, and suddenly I was hit with a crippling feeling of dread. At that age, I'd never experienced anything like it. Pure anxiety. But I knew. I just knew if we waited 5 minutes, I would be fine. I tried telling my mom this, and she was having none of it. I even tried to just stall her by begging. Nope. I got dragged. Not literally, lol. Out of the hotel and into the car. We pull out of the parking lot and get T-boned so hard that we do a 180 into oncoming traffic. As soon as we all realized we were okay, I was like, yep, there it is. I've never let either of them forget it either. Story 4. Last year on December 1st, I'd slept for almost a week trying to fight what I thought was the flu. Woke up and that exact gut feeling kept on telling me something was not right with me. Called my parents to tell them and then cabbed me to the emergency room. Took blood, the whole 9 yards. Was there for 8 hours. Discharged and sent home. Called the next morning asking me to come back because they found something in my blood. Bacteremia and endocarditis. I was put on penicillin immediately for 2 months. More tests, more things wrong. Went for a specialized test on December 21st. I woke up to them telling me I need surgery as soon as possible. They're trying to find a surgical team. The earliest is the 24th. I go in and while they're operating, I have an ascending aortic aneurysm, and it caused an aortic dissection. They were able to fix it. I've got a synthetic valve in there now. Here's the kicker. I work in a restaurant kitchen just before the start of the holiday season. Normally, most cooks would tough it out and just work. Most think it happens and it'll get better soon. Just keep going. There was just something about the way I was feeling this time that made me go to the hospital. I'm told that if I hadn't done that, I more than likely would have died before my birthday and they would have found out about the aneurysm during the autopsy. That still sends chills down my spine. My best friend works as an emergency room nurse at the same hospital that I was operated on, and she was freaking out internally but kept it together on the outside for me. She explained just how serious this all was after I was in recovery. I promised to tell her whenever I get that same feeling again. Story 5. I was walking to the barber shop and for some reason, everything just felt off. I ignored the feeling, but every step I took just made me feel like something wasn't right. So I decided to just go grab some food and come back. While I was eating, I saw police cars and ambulances driving around where I was before. It turns out there was a murder. Now I always listen to my gut feeling. Story 6. Not me, but my mother. Saved my grandfather's life when he had a stroke in his chair in their living room. We had all started to walk around the development when my mother, after about 50 to 75 meters from the house, said, "I'm going to go back and check on Dad." I went with her, and I nearly witnessed my grandfather die. He He was on the chair, conscious but unable to move or talk, just looking at my mother with bulging eyes. She called 911 once, then twice when she felt that they were running late. The ambulance came and got him on the stretcher, but it was too wide to fit out the door. We ended up tearing the door frame off to get him out. Because he was conscious, he actually remembers the ride to the hospital. He told us later that he heard the driver or someone say, "There's not a chance that this guy lives." That was when I was around 5 to 6 years old. He's still alive to this day, more than a decade later. At my mother's funeral, part of his speech was about how, without my mother's actions, he would not have been able to spend time with her during her final years of life, and for that, he's eternally grateful. Story 7. I smelled burning plastic early in the morning at my family cottage and almost went back to sleep. I was around 15, but got up to investigate. A socket in the outside of the building had caught fire and flames and were shooting up the wall. The rest of my family was still sleeping and there wasn't enough smoke for the alarms to go off. I ran and got the fire extinguisher, got my dad up, put it in his hands, and pointed him toward the fire, stopped it, and called the fire department. Story 8. Not me, but my mom's best friend. July 2000. My mom's best friend Michelle and her husband were out of town. Michelle has this overwhelming feeling of panic and that something was wrong and my mom needed her. Neither of them had a cell phone. Michelle felt so uneasy that she made her husband drive them back home. My dad had committed suicide at her home that morning. Story 9. My boyfriend and I were visiting friends for a week in Phoenix. We girls were lounging at the pool while the guys were flexing their grilling skills. My boyfriend paused a moment, stood very still, then told me to go get dressed. We had to go, right now. I wanted to fuss, but something told me not to. We drove straight through to San Antonio, right to his parents' very rural house. Before cell phones, and they didn't have a landline within half a mile. Seconds before we arrived, his little sister had jumped off a rain barrel and landed on a metal spike that went straight up through her foot and into her leg. His dad was at work, so there was no car available there. She was bleeding like crazy, and his mother had just walked out and found her. I don't know what spoke to him in Phoenix, but it would have been all bad if we had not arrived exactly when we did. Story 10. Circa 1983. My boyfriend and I had an apartment together. He worked, but I didn't. Every day I packed a nice lunch for him and made a good dinner. One afternoon, nothing out of the ordinary, I was laying out at the complex pool and an older guy walked over to introduce himself. He wasn't hitting on me. He just moved into town and was new to the complex. We chatted for 3 or 4 minutes when my boyfriend showed up at the pool. Odd, but okay, introductions, then we returned to the apartment for lunch. Once behind the door of the apartment, he said to me, "Stay away from that guy. There's something very bad about him. He feels like the bottom of the deepest ocean." If you read my other post about the long sudden journey, you kinda know that he senses things. The reason he came home during his lunch was that he had a feeling that he had before I was even at the pool. He just sensed something bad and came home. After he returned to work, I was taking the kitchen trash out and the man approached me again. I'm a former army and in pretty good shape, and he's older. No place in a swimsuit for a weapon, and I could probably take him. Plus, it wasn't a secluded place. I'm not afraid. He asked me if my boyfriend was psychic. As it turns out, this guy is psychic and in fact, recently transferred to San Antonio from a sister radio station to do his show there. He told me that when two psychics meet, oftentimes they feel something like cold darkness because they're receptive to vibes instead of emitting them like most people. In the end, he guided my boyfriend to better understanding the things he sensed and they became great friends. Story 11. I was hanging out with friends at a bar but then going to head to my friends to stay the night. We drove separately though. It was in a city where a super high crime rate in an even rougher part of town. We left the bar at like 3 a.m. and the drive wasn't far, but I was really low on gas and wasn't sure if I was going to make it. I'm not normally a person who's paranoid over city or neighborhood crime rates, and I spent like half my time in the city and the area we were in anyway, so it wasn't foreign to me by any means. Even so, just to be on the safe side, I picked a well-lit gas station at a relatively busy intersection. I was the only car at the gas station, and when I pulled up to the pump, I luckily took a moment to text my friend that I'd catch up with him in a few minutes. As I'm doing that though, another car pulls up right on the other side of the pump that I was at. I have no idea what made me pause, but I just waited for a second to let them get out first. But I had to keep waiting because they weren't getting out. At first I thought that maybe they were taking a moment to get their wallet, text someone, or just do something. I couldn't see through the window tint at all though, but I also tried not to stare at them or make it super obvious. I'm also not a very intimidating guy. I waited it out for 5 minutes and then started getting more worried. I texted my friend to tell him exactly where I was. I couldn't leave because I didn't have enough gas to get anywhere else, and I didn't want to just drive to my friend's place if they followed me. Another 10 minutes later, the car pulled off. No one ever got out to get gas, including me. I just headed to my friend's and decided to risk getting there on what I had left in my tank. I'm not sure what made me that paranoid at the moment, but I'm really glad I hesitated. Story 12. Not mine, but my aunt's. She was with my mom and some of their friends at Lake Sammamish the day Ted Bundy took Janice out, and Denise Naslund. She was hammered. And Ted approached her after, I'm guessing, overhearing them say someone needed to do a beer run. He approached her saying he and some friends had a keg and she should come. She threw her arm around his shoulder and they walked off. My mom and their friends called after her and she initially didn't listen. She was a stunning blonde and a flirt. It was just beer. She'd be fine. One of the other girls they were with walked up and said one of the guys went and they were going to swim until he came back. My aunt said the girl looked terrified, and suddenly my aunt felt like she was going to puke. He dropped her arm and skittered it off more or less. Later, the girl told my aunt she had a bad feeling about the guy, and my aunt mentioned how she felt nauseous but thought it was because she was so drunk. Had she not been stopped, my aunt would have been Denise Naslund. Ted had already taken Janice at the time he approached my aunt. She won't talk about this day. I think she feels survivor's guilt. Story 13. I was on a road trip with my dad through mountainous terrain and it started raining. We were stuck in our car because of a traffic jam on a very narrow mountain road. I got a feeling that we should not be here and told my dad that we should get out of the car just in case. My dad gave me a puzzled look but agreed after I insisted. It probably was only a minute that passed after we took shelter in a nearby tea stall that a thunderous sound startled the bejesus out of us. Lo and behold, our car was nowhere to be found. In its place was a boulder the size of a house. From that moment onwards, Final Destination has been my least favorite movie. Story 14. I went to go sell an expensive smartphone I got as a gift on Craigslist in Philadelphia. I talked with a guy for a while about it, and he just would not agree to meet me inside anywhere. I was young and stupid and needed money, so eventually, I succumbed. I hit a supermarket nearby and told him where I was, and stayed inside for a few minutes. I then realized how stupid I was for going alone to this sale and not meeting inside in a relatively public place. As I walked out, a group of unscrupulous-looking fellows asked me if I was selling a smartphone on Craigslist. I decided to just roll on past and get in my car and leave. After they realized I had ditched the meetup, I started getting all sorts of threatening text messages and voicemails from this group of guys. I'm pretty positive I would have been mugged if I hadn't walked past them because of my gut. Story 15. The guy was trying to hit on me at a bar, and while I was a bit drunk, I was still able to think straight. I talked to him because he was kinda cute. After a while, he tries to convince me to go home with him, but my gut told me not to. Later on the news, it said some guy was kidnapping and girls before killing them. The description matched the guy exactly. Never before have I felt so relieved in my life. Story 16. About 10 years ago, working security at a site about 50 miles from home, got off shift at midnight and didn't bother to change out of uniform because I was only going to stop for gas. 2 stations in the town I was working in were open after midnight, but it slipped my mind as I drove past the first one. Pulled into the other, same brand, same gas price, same sort of dump entirely. I just didn't like something about it. Nobody else was around but the clerk that I could see, but I decided to go back to the other one. Topped off and headed back out of town. I get close to that station again. 3 city cop cars, 2 deputies, and a state trooper are outside blocking the road with guns drawn. Turns out a city cop walked in on a robbery. The dude put a bullet in his vest and the store owner knocked the robber out cold with a bat before the cop could recover enough to get his gun out. That would have been me, in a uniform with a nice shiny badge, but no body armor. Story 17. I went to the hospital with shortness of breath and my heart racing. They did a chest x-ray, blood test for blood clots, ECG, and a few other tests, but all came back normal. After observing me overnight, everything still looked good. Oxygen saturation was perfect, my heart rate was still a bit elevated, but nothing too crazy. And it seemed that it was likely leftover symptoms from a bad virus that I had a week or so earlier. The ER doctor asks me how I would feel if they sent me home, and I just had a bad feeling about it. I told him as such and that I had no real basis for it except that I just felt off about it. He said, fair enough, let's try one more test, and if that comes back negative, then we'll send you up to general medicine and see if they can track something down. That test was a VQ scan that found, despite all their tests showing no results for blood clots, I actually had a whole bunch of them in both lungs. I ended up with a diagnosis of unprovoked bilateral pulmonary embolisms, and I'm on blood thinners for life. Super grateful both for the bad feeling and for the ER doctor who was willing to listen to it. Story 18. My aunt told me a story about my dad, who greatly dislikes his sister and is an all-around asshole 98% of the time, calling her out of the blue one night while she was in college. She answered. He said he didn't know why, but he had this urge to call her, to make sure she was okay. She told him she was fine and thanked him for calling to check on her. She never told anyone else except me, and hopefully a therapist or two. But she was holding the bottle of pills she was planning to commit suicide with right when he called her. 20-some years later, and she's very happy with her decision to live. Story 19. In 2004 on Boxing Day, not me but my mother, the family trip included all cousins and extended family on my dad's side to visit the coastal south of Sri Lanka on vacation, about 20 people in all. Well-planned trip, last moment my mother didn't want to go. No reason at all. None of us could get her to explain why, but she refused to go. So we went inland on a different trip to see some other relatives. Around midday, The entire extended family, now on both sides, were sitting shocked in front of the television, watching the very same hotel we booked being washed away live by a tsunami. To date, she still can't explain what she felt. Story 20. It didn't save me, but saved a friend. A big group of friends and I were walking home from an event in a town we weren't used to. It was night, and hardly anyone was around. Empty streets and all that. We were walking down a sidewalk that had high fences next to it, so when you turned a corner, whatever was around it was out of sight. One of the girls fell behind, distracted by her phone, I think. And I noticed, so I started drifting behind as well to become a sort of midway point between her and the group. Soon we were nearing where we were staying, and our group rounded a corner, then started making their way into the yard where our living quarters were. I saw a car drive past us, then turned the corner down the street the girl was still on. As soon as I saw it, I suddenly got this suspicious, awful feeling. So I stopped and went back to the corner to keep an eye on my friend. The car drove past her, stopped, did a complete U-turn, and slowly started creeping up behind and alongside her. She was still on her phone and wasn't noticing a thing. I stepped out from behind the corner and started walking towards her. The car sped off quickly as soon as the driver saw me. It scares me that someone could have grabbed her, and none of us would have seen a thing. It would have just been one of those cliche movie moments where you turn around and realize a member of the group is missing. To compound that potential tragedy, she'd just gotten engaged a few weeks prior. I think the fact that we'd worked with some safe houses in the area that discussed human trafficking probably aided in me being on high alert, and the area we were in was known for that sort of thing. Story 21. I was 15 years old and my mom dropped me off at McDonald's to get breakfast while she went across the street to get Starbucks. It was a shopping mall in suburbia and we were on the way to pick up a new kitten a few hours away. Instead of walking the 100 yards to my mom, I sat outside waiting for her to pick me up. Teenagers, I guess. As I'm standing there, a guy in an old station wagon with 2 kids in the back starts talking to me. He asks me where I'm going and I say whatever town it was. He says he's going there too with his kids and asks if I want to come. I tell him no, that my mom is across the street, and he comes closer. My gut is saying something is off, so I see a random woman walk out of Starbucks and I point to her and say that's my mom right there. He freaked out and left really quickly. I still remember those 2 kids in the back seat. They looked so off. I wonder to this day if they're okay. Edit. I did not tell my mom and I don't know why. I think I was scared she would be upset with me and not want to go to get a kitten. I was barely 15 and teenagers are selfish buttheads. I finally told her a few years ago and she was super upset about it. I was so freaked out I didn't even think to get a plate. I grew up in suburbia, but the rich kind of suburbia, where this kind of stuff was never talked about. I wasn't into true crime, so I had no idea what you're supposed to do. Story 22. Not mine, but my dad's. I was downstairs helping him with some woodworking when I was 10 or 11. He went running a 2x4 through the table saw when he noticed I was at his elbow rather than behind him. He stopped and told me to never stand behind a board when it's going through the saw in case it gets thrown. I thought he was being overly cautious and I didn't have as good of a view from behind him, but whatever, I got behind him. He flipped on the saw and ran the board through. He only got 1/3 of the way through though, when the blade hit a nut and flung the 2x4 hard enough to crash against the wall 10 feet behind. If I hadn't moved, it would have hit me square in the chest and could have killed me. Story 23. I was an unpopular kid, and I always wanted to go on sleepovers, but it rarely happened. In 6th or 7th grade, I get invited to this girl's house for a birthday party. I'm friendly with her, but not close. I go to her house and I feel weird right away. Her mom and stepdad were sitting in the living room smoking, but being perfectly friendly. The whole night I couldn't shake this feeling of oppressiveness, despair, and danger. I spent the evening keeping my guard up and keeping an eye out for the entire family, without any idea why. At night, the girl begs me to spend the night. Even though it hurt to say no and I could tell she was desperate, I lied and told her my parents wouldn't let me. When they said over the phone they would. A couple of months later, a student told me she had left the school and moved because her stepfather would her at night in her bed. I think of her often and hope she wasn't hurt that night and hope she's doing better. But I'm glad I got out. Edit. No, I didn't understand what was going on. I would have told somebody. I was also being creeped out by her otherwise cute brother, which I just remembered. Story 24. My dad had to go to court to settle a way overdue payment for the place he worked at. He was going to take me with him so I can be more exposed to the adult world, so to speak. However, that meant he would have to leave the office's back door unlocked so the rest of the staff could clock in. He suddenly didn't feel right about it and decided to have me man in the office instead. He got T-boned outside the courthouse in the passenger side of the car that day. The car was totaled, and I would have gone severely hurt if I was there. Edit. To help clear some things up, we both first traveled together to his office to unlock the door. He got out of the car, unlocked the back door, and when he came back to the car, that's when he decided to tell me to stay at his office. It literally delayed him by only a few seconds it took for me to get out of the said car. Story 25. Saw a mannequin ominously placed by the trash in a dark alley. Almost walked away, but decided to check it out because something felt really off. Turned out to be a 15-year-old girl who had overdosed. Edit. The whole story goes like this. Two friends and I were filming a music video and got back to our friend's house around midnight. As we were walking in his back door, I see the mannequin laying by the trash can. I honestly thought it was a prank at first because the alley was completely dark and the mannequin was laying perfectly under the one light in the alley. I decide to check it out and my two friends come with me. As we get closer, we realize that it's a girl. We figured she's in her mid-20s and probably just passed out drunk because there are a bunch of bars in the area. And one friend shakes her. And after a few shakes, she comes to and has this absolutely wild animal-like look in her eyes. She hops to her feet and thrashes at us a bit before taking off down the alley. She's understandably afraid because she just came to a dark alley with 3 dudes hovering over her. As she makes her way down the alley, we try to tail her while giving her space because she's acting wild. I want to call the cops. My one friend wants to help her but not call the cops and get her in trouble, and my third friend wants to leave her figuring she's just drunk and headed home. While arguing about what to do and keeping our distance so we don't freak her out, we actually lose track of her but find her phone in the middle of the alley. It's got hundreds of missed calls. It starts ringing so we answer it, and it's an extremely and understandably upset friend who says everyone has been trying to get a hold of her. She says she's not in the state, but she says she will call her mom and have her call us in a minute. A minute later, the mom calls and tells us that her daughter is 15 and went missing earlier that night. She's eerily calm and nonchalant about the whole thing and says something to the effect of, "Oh, she had her wisdom teeth out earlier that day and is probably just messed up from the meds." She says not to worry about the cops, she'll handle them, and she and her boyfriend will be by shortly to grab the phone. About 10 minutes later, the mom and the boyfriend show up with flashlights, grab the phone and all the info we have, make a few weird jokes and go off down the alley. The whole thing was weird, but we figured they were not worried, so we go on about our night feeling uneasy. The next day, my buddy calls me and says the mom showed back up at his house and has a full-on breakdown in his living room. He tells him that they found her down the road a few minutes after we met with him. Turns out she had downed almost a whole bottle of vodka and every pill she could find in the house. They had to pump her stomach and the doctor said if we hadn't found her and she would have been dead before morning. The mother then hugs my friend, gives him an envelope and leaves. The envelope had $1,000 in it. Luckily, we had exchanged addresses with the mother earlier, so my buddy went and slipped the money back under her door. I say I don't know if she made it because even though she got saved that time, if she's 15 and going through that much, I just don't know. I think about her a lot. I truly hope she's doing okay. Story 26. A guy definitely roofied my drink at a bar. He was totally mild-mannered and not creepy at all. Asked me how to sign up for karaoke and pick a song, sat beside me and talked casually. Didn't touch me once. But then he pointed to something behind my head to distract me. I looked away and looked back at him and he was looking away from me into the crowd of people. It was a very stupid way to distract someone, to point and then act like you didn't do anything as opposed to pretending to have thought you saw something. Then I saw him screwing one of those little canisters back shut in his keychain. I asked him what he kept in there to call him out. He was cold and expressionless as he began to slowly twist it back open and said there was nothing in there. I stopped drinking my drink and he performed his song. Then I sang and took off immediately after. It was really f***ed up and I'm glad he wasn't very smooth or I don't know what could have happened. What always freaked me out was how normal he seemed, before he became suddenly cold and robotic when I called him out on that canister thing. But it made me realize, of course, would seem normal. That's how they get close enough to you to attack you. I never ended up reporting it because I actually didn't put it together at the moment. At least I didn't think I did. It was more a doubt in the back of my mind and I didn't fully believe it. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid and I didn't fully trust my own judgment. It was only after replaying the events in my mind and talking it out with someone else in the following days and weeks that I completely put it together and realized that the suspicion I'd felt had been right. I wasn't being paranoid or crazy. His intentions were very clear after the fact, but at the time I didn't realize it. I'm sure I should have gone to the police, but as I said, it took some time to even fully understand and believe what had happened. I did message someone working at the bar, who's friends with my ex's mom. She never replied to me, and I didn't take it any further. I also felt ashamed and stupid, though I shouldn't have. I was not at the bar alone, but I was left alone. I went with my male cousin who is 10 years younger than me and pretty clueless, and he was hanging out at the bar getting hammered and waiting for this girl who worked there who he had a crush on. I can be pretty naive. I grew up pretty sheltered and I never really went through a party phase. Thus, I don't have a ton of experience going to bars or parties. So whatever you think I should have or could have done differently, I did the best that I could in that situation. And it's much easier to say that you would have done the perfect thing when you're not in the situation and you're not me. P.S. He was a shitty singer. Story 27. I was falling asleep in the car, my friend was driving. All of a sudden, he stops talking and I think to myself, what the f***? Something's not right. I opened my eyes and turned over. The dude was having a seizure. His legs were stiff as f*** and his foot was on the gas. We were going downhill towards a busy intersection. We had the red. So I slammed the car in park and pulled the keys out. The car starts rattling, making a weird noise, but it gained so much momentum it was still rolling down. So I grabbed the steering wheel and veered us off the road into the side of an abandoned building. I opened his door and climbed over him. I was able to get him out and turn him on his side. The police officer that showed up was like, "You couldn't have done this more safely?" I just said, "Sorry." But inside I was like, "F*** you." Story 28. I had an instance where I was traveling down 1 to 5 near Wilsonville, Oregon. It's 3 lanes and I watched a guy go from the far left lane through the other 2 with no blinker fairly rapidly. Everyone went past, but I had the feeling something was wrong. As I came up next to him, I watched him continue off the road and drive over steel wire barricades, held up by short steel posts, just ripping his truck apart. Everyone else continued past, but I slowed and moved over, keeping pace with this guy, just slightly ahead of him. Once I saw an opportunity, I went ahead and parked on the shoulder and ran back towards his still approaching vehicle. He was only doing about 5 to 8 miles per hour, so I managed to step onto his running boards and get inside the vehicle, slammed it into a park. The fellow was having a heart attack. My fiancée was on the phone with 911, and within 3 minutes, they were on the scene, and this guy got the help he needed. Saved him from a bigger wreck and, most importantly, his life. Story 29. It wasn't mine, but my boss's, actually. It was an old day at work, it was about to be dinner rush, and I was tired. As usual, I was going to go to the dollar store to get some Red Bull. I asked my manager if he wanted to split it because they were 2 for $5. He said no, but as soon as I reached the door, he said, "Wait." I asked him what was wrong and he said I should go later. He didn't give me a reason. We were pretty relaxed, so I told him to piss off, and as soon as I pushed the door outwards, I hear a sound I can't even describe aside from just breaking. Whatever it was broken. That's all I knew. Turns out an SUV drove straight into the dollar store's front door and their Red Bull fridge. My manager has annoyed me like that a million times, but I'll never forget the time he saved my life with his bullshit. Story 30. We were looking at houses a while back and found one that was a great location. Would have been the perfect size for us. And didn't appear to need any work other than a new carpet and stuff I wanted to do, like painting and switching it over from oil-burning furnace. I just had a nagging feeling about it, and my husband agreed. As much as we loved it, something was off with it. I actually thought ghosts or something silly like that, and we ended up passing on it. I was still kicking myself about it until a few months later when it had a major electrical fire. The whole house and everything in it was a total loss. The family that lived there barely got out alive. Story 31. When I was young, around 8 or 9 probably, I lived 3 blocks from a convenience store. It was the early 90s. My best friend and I convinced our parents to let us walk to the store alone to get some snacks. Important to add that the 2 blocks closest to the store are connected, but the 3rd block we lived on was its own unconnected neighborhood. So anyway, as we're walking back from the store, we're coming up to the 1st street and a truck drives by and stops on the side of the road in between the 1st and 2nd block on our side of the road. I stopped and told my friend that we should go down the 1st street and go through the neighborhood, come back out the 2nd street, and then head to our 3rd street to avoid the truck. She thought I was being stupid, but I refused to keep walking in the main street, so she followed me down the 1st road. We are now in the 1st neighborhood and about halfway between the 1st and 2nd street when we see the truck slowly driving down the 2nd street into the neighborhood. The driver sees us and immediately slams on the gas and turns his truck towards us on the street. We ran and hid in some bushes further into the neighborhood for about 10 minutes. We heard the truck driving by back and forth for about the first 5 and then it was quiet, so we started making our way out of the neighborhood towards the 2nd street again. Suddenly, here comes the truck again, slowly, sees us, and guns it towards us again. We jumped over a fence into a backyard and started pounding on the back door. By the way, this is a Tuesday, middle of the day during summer vacation. Most people are at work, but miraculously, a man and woman opened the door and let us in. The woman had just had a baby a week before, so they were home on leave. They called the cops and my mom and the man went outside. He said the truck drove by and the man saw him standing outside and sped out of the neighborhood. Cops and my mom showed up minutes later and we gave a description and never heard anything about it again. Our parents just drove us to the convenience store from then on. My mom still talks about it to this day and how shocked she was that I had such a strong intuition at that age. Story 32. I was in the Amazon at the end of a 3-month solo trip around Latin America. Wanted to enjoy one last walk through the jungle before leaving, so left my jungle lodge around 8 a.m. to walk down to a small river nearby. I stop and close my eyes to listen to the sounds as the jungle is super loud with crickets, birds, insects, etc. Almost immediately, I got a weird feeling and felt really uncomfortable, which was weird because up until then I'd only felt peaceful and happy. When I opened my eyes, I realized everything had gone completely quiet, which was definitely not normal, and not something I had experienced in other rainforests I'd been to. It was bizarre. I immediately felt that I had to leave, and fast. After I dipped and got back to the jungle lodge, I told the tour guide what happened, and he said it usually only gets quiet when there's a big predator close by. Thanks, but no thanks. Some additional details. I was staying with a tour group in a jungle lodge in the Peruvian Amazon. Next to the lodges, there was a path that led down to a river, about a 5-minute walk, where we told we could go down to swim. Previously, our guides had given us some free time in between tours to allow us to go down unaccompanied by them, so I assumed it was fairly safe. They also said in the years the lodge had been running, they had never seen a big cat around there because they are usually shy and the activity in the lodges generally keep them away. I took this walk around 8 a.m. on the last day just to listen to the sounds one last time, as it was the end of an amazing 3-month trip, and the jungle had been my favorite part. I had only been walking for around 2 minutes before I decided to stop to take in the sounds and say goodbye, because we would be leaving shortly after. I definitely wasn't wandering off looking to do my own exploration. I had already spent an incredible and guided week there. Story 33. One time when my little sister and I wandered off in the superstore, a strange man was standing behind us in the toy aisle. I was getting super weird vibes about him. Keep in mind I was only around 9 to 10, and he also looked super shady. He had a big hoodie, dark sunglasses, you name it. Just screaming So obviously my first thought was to just move away from him because we could just look at different toys anyways. Nope, apparently not. He just kept following us but maintaining a small distance at the same time, and eventually I whispered to my sister that a man was following, and we started walking in circles around different aisles to lose him, until we found her dad. I remember how he looked at us one last time before walking away. I was scared of strangers for a while after that, even though I was really outgoing as a kid. I was afraid he'd followed us home for some reason. And looking back on it now, he could have been trying to snatch us or something, but maybe he just wanted to help, but I'm pretty sure there was something wrong with him. Story 34. This isn't my story. It's from an old high school teacher of mine. His friends were bar hopping, they were all underage and traveling to a bar about 45 minutes away. It wasn't like this is the first time they were doing this or anything. All of a sudden, he got a really bad feeling and started panicking. His friends made fun of him and wouldn't let him out of the car, but it got so bad they had to dump him in this small town in the middle of nowhere. He used a payphone and called a cab home. The next morning, he saw that his friends had been in a car accident, obviously due to drunk driving. Most of the friends died, and one survived with a severe brain injury. His life was saved all because of a gut feeling. Sometimes he has survivor's guilt now. Story 35. I was driving and it started to snow. I noticed that I was going a bit fast and strongly sensed I should slow down. I did, and a couple of seconds later, I came up around a bend with the road suddenly covered in ice. I started to fishtail while sliding directly toward 2 people standing outside their car. They had wrecked in the same manner that I was about to do and were standing outside their car with me heading straight for them. I quickly thought of my options and ended up doing a hard right straight into the highway barrier. I slid nearly 100 plus feet, dragging the front of my car to slow it down. Because I had decided to slow down, I was able to give the 2 guys enough time to get out of the way before I slammed into their cars. Even though I totaled my car, which was sad, I did not end up killing 2 people that night. The police did not end up ticketing anyone, thankfully, and they finally sanded the road after we had all wrecked. Snow while driving still scares me to this day. Moral of the story, you're safer inside your car, unless it's on fire. Story 36. A few years ago when I was 19 and studying abroad in Europe, my friend and I decided to go to Turkey. It was our first time traveling on our own without a group, and we decided to walk around the square outside of the Blue Mosque. We felt very safe during the day and decided to see the city at night with the lights. As we were in the square, we were hounded by the typical store owners trying to sell us something. Finally, most went away, and as we were going back to our hotel, a younger guy approached us. He said he had a shop in the corner, which he pointed to with lots of souvenirs including carpets. I grew up with a lot of handmade woven carpets from my parents' travels to the Middle East and Asia. I decided it would be a nice gift, so we followed him. And when we got to what we thought was his shop, we stopped. We started to walk in and he said not that one, the one around the corner. We poke our head around and sure enough see a store only selling carpets. I started to get a slightly strange feeling but nothing overwhelming, so we followed him as we could see the store. When we walked in, about 13 to 15 other men were in the shop. They were pointing out carpets and showing us around, and I started to get really uncomfortable. My friend seemed completely at ease, so we followed the group around the bend to the other part of the store. In Turkey, it is common to be offered tea, so that part is not particularly odd, but the men who were now circling us were insistent that we have the tea with them in the basement. I kept saying no, but they were leading us toward steps, completely surrounding us. We got to the steps and my friend started walking down. My body began to sweat. My heart went crazy, and I never had such an overwhelming fear. I kept trying to think of how we could overpower these men. I grabbed my phone, stopped in my tracks, and gasped. Friend's name, we need to go right now. My mom just texted me asking why we aren't back at the hotel yet because the map shows we're at this store. We're supposed to FaceTime with them in 10 minutes. The men kind of look around and tell us we can have the tea in less than that amount of time. I keep insisting that my parents are freaking out because they can tell we're in the carpet store and not in the hotel, and that they will likely contact the embassy if we don't get going. They continued blocking the staircase. I told them that we would come for tea in the morning as I still really wanted a carpet and that we needed to get out of the store and back to FaceTime. It took a little persuading, but they eventually opened a path for us to go to the door. One of them followed us back to the square, insisting that we return and come back and see them. Of course we didn't. I have no idea if they were completely harmless or not, but I had never had such an overwhelming feeling. They easily could have drugged us, placed us in carpets, and taken us out. My parents didn't actually have our location as my phone was on airplane mode, so who actually knows? On the other hand, I might have been paranoid, but it wasn't a situation I ever wanted to be in again. Once we were back at our hotel, she told me she was really scared too, but that she thought I was fine, so she went with it. Yeah, if a group of dudes or anyone in a foreign country was trying to convince me to go into a basement, that's a no.